The names that we use for people and ourselves are part of our identity. They're not just some random sort of label that we put on ourselves. They can give people an idea of what class we're from, what year we were born, what type of society we live in, what country we live in. You know, you only have to immediately think of names that you think of normal or abnormal to realise how much there is in a name. This is particularly true in fiction, and it's particularly true in witness. So the first group I want to have a look at are actually the Amish characters in the film, and let's see their names. So we've got Rachel, that's an Old Testament name. We have Jacob, her dead husband, another Old Testament name. Samuel, I'm sure you're seeing the pattern here. Daniel, and Eli. All of these are Old Testament names. Now, most of you will know this, but in case you didn't, there are two major sort of they're collections of books of the Bible, almost two Bibles. There's the Old Testament, which is thousands and thousands of years old and documents the relationship between the Israelites and their God, and the New Testament, which documents the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, also known as Christ. So it's telling two things that the Amish all have Old Testament names. One is they all have something in common with their names. It's a sign of a community that they all have sort of the same flavour of names, and it's telling that they all have biblical names. These are people who take their faith very seriously, and it's a very kind of, people consider the Old Testament be sort of more hardcore than the New Testament. It's actually quite brutal in spots, the Old Testament, but which the Amish aren't, so that's a complication. But it's a bit more hardcore religious, the Old Testament. So all of the Amish characters in this film have Old Testament names. Now, I don't know if all Amish people have Old Testament names, but it's certainly consistent, and it tells us something about that group and their identity and their sense of belonging. In contrast to this, in the very same film, let's have a look at the secular or non-religious world. We have McPhee, which is not a biblical name. We have Schaefer, which is not a biblical name. Even Book's sister, Elaine's not biblical. Carter, his best friend, is not biblical. So all of these people, not only do they not have Old Testament names, but they don't have biblical names of any description. So it gives us an idea, and in fact there's no religious symbolism anywhere in the secular world, that these are people for whom, you know, religion isn't something that binds them together. Whoops, I just clicked the wrong way. Which brings us to the interesting case of John Book. His Christian name, John, now that is a Bible name, but it's from the New Testament. So it says that he's got something in common with the Amish, but he's not exactly the same as the Amish. The other thing that it's worth us having a look at is his name, Book. So I've just talked about how he's got his New Testament name. Book implies a certain properness, which we know that John Book has. You know, the expression to go by the book, to be somebody who does the right thing, they do the proper thing. And I think this is something that we're meant to understand about Book. And the other significance is, of course, the good book is a name that people use for the Bible, be it Old Testament or New Testament. So he's kind of got a double-barrel biblical name, which I think gives us a hint that he might fit in or belong in the Amish community, although I couldn't tell you whether he really does or really doesn't. Another quick twist I want to have a look at before we finish is that Schaefer, when he is good, is called Paul, which is his Christian name, and it's a sign of how close he and Book are, that they're on first name terms. But also Paul is another biblical name from the New Testament. So when Schaefer's being good, he's got the same kind of good name that John has, but when he goes bad, they call him just Schaefer. And then at the very end of the film again, when he's kind of redeemed by not killing everybody in sight, he goes back to calling him Paul again. So certainly the names that you have can show what type of community you're in, but also what that community holds to be important.